What questions or problems are you working to solve?
Modern injustices of today's, of modern day is the lack of equitable access to healthcare for real disadvantaged communities globally, and within that, children. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to solve for is how do we improve the access to children in some of the poorest countries who often have the largest burden of disease and constraint, increase that access to probably one of the most cost-effective interventions out there, which is vaccines. And so what I do at Gavi, at the Vaccine Alliance, is I help ministries of health have access, increase that access to innovations and technologies that potentially could help them with their vaccination goals for children and for the broader public writ large. And so some of the questions that I like to answer in my role, and I think we need to answer, is how do you get more vaccines to distributed populations, whether it's in remote areas, whether it's in marginalized communities, whether it's communities that are socially isolated as well as physically isolated. How do you improve the awareness about the value of vaccination and why that's important to have on an ongoing basis? Because you need to have vaccination not just once, but you need to have it as a life course for a child. And so how do parents and caregivers understand that value? And then how do we think about the collection, the utilization, the access of public health data, immunization data? And I think an untapped source of expertise and innovation and potentially a point to how you might solve these challenges is from the private sector, within the corporate sector. And I believe that to be the case, because if you start to break down those problem statements, you already see solutions that are existing today in industry. Commodities can be distributed to far-flung countries and remote populations. We know that. And we already know that there's a lot of deep understanding about behavior insights and consumer patterns that companies use for increased marketing and increased marketing share. So how do you think about that? And also, being able to understand data and create new innovations or approaches. I think we've seen that being applied to customer experiences and so forth. And so the question is now not, can these things be achieved? The question is, how do you then identify the right practices, and how do you identify the right partners, and how do you identify build the right models that can be adapted into low context settings, high resource constraint settings for immunization? And I think that is the problems we're trying to solve, that I'm trying to solve at Gavi. And a lot of the work that we've been doing has been looking at, yes, technology is obviously a big driver for some incremental and transformational changes, but there are other innovations in how people behave and how they interact with each other, how we think about communication, how we think about building platforms for communities to come together. Those are innovations themselves. And so how do we think about that, and how does the private sector contribute towards that? So that's where I am focused on.
Why have you chosen to pursue this question or problem?
I've chosen to pursue this question and this question the question really is, how do you build better solutions from a range of unlikely actors? And there's a number of reasons why. I think one of the principal amongst them is, when you look at the burden of disease and you look at the level of resourcing that's available to some of these poorer countries, and you look at the tools that they have, there is a real stark difference and discrepancy between all those things. And I think it is incumbent upon us in this community to help support countries with their ambitions, with their approaches for their populations, and bring forward the solutions that they can adapt and they can use. And so I think that's a very sort of strong, sort of personal, I think, an organizational approach. Also on the personal side, I mean, my former legal background comes in play here because of a sense of justice, and I feel there's a sense of injustice, and I strive towards that. But even if you just think about it economically, right, the investment that are made in vaccinations, for every dollar that's made in a vaccine investment, so purchase vaccination, deployment of vaccination, you get about $54 return on investment. And that means that $54 return on investment means more people are able to go to work. Children are able to go into school. You see the knock-on effects on communities and economic empowerment. And I think that's a true sense of development from my, you have to really enable countries to be able to build their prosperity through health, and the avenue that we're looking at. When you look at that on a macro scale, and to the extent of the investments that Gavi has made in vaccination to date, in terms of lives saved, I think it's more than 888 million vaccinations, and when you look at vaccination campaigns, it's more than 1 billion children that have been touched by this intervention. You're looking at close to $150 billion return on global economic benefits. Now, if you start to extrapolate that out further, these are savings that countries can make, and I think that makes a lot of sense, a lot of business sense, and particularly in the context of recovering and sort of still going through this pandemic. I think everyone needs to look at health interventions in that frame.
As individuals and collectively as a society, what can we do to help answer the questions or solve these problems?
What we can do to help answer the question is a tough one. I think it comes back to different constituents. So with those within the private sector, do come forward with your ideas, do come forward with your approaches, do come forward with your solutions, but also do come forward with humility. Right? There are a lot of solutions that are being deployed, but there may not be. There are a lot of challenges there are no quick fixes. On the public sector side, for those colleagues who are working in this space as well, come with an open mind. I think we are all learning as to how to solve for these challenges and how to overcome some of these real stubborn problems, whether it's vaccination, whether it's in other areas, particularly where there's, the communities we're trying to serve are less equipped to support themselves. And so how do we do so? I think for the economists, certainly come forward and look at the broader economic impact of interventions, be rigorous into defining the investment needed and the return on investment. And I think for and I think for others out there, for individuals who don't fall within these categories, and also for individuals who sort of are interested, really pick a problem and fall in love with the problem. I think that's it's a lot. Fall in love with the problem, not fall in love with the solution. I think we're all guilty of that. We love falling in love with the solution, but fall in love with the problem, and really understand the limits of your own knowledge, and then bring others who can complement that knowledge to help build those solutions and those approaches. And I think that's what we need. I think we're seeing at the moment of human history that there are far number of problems and ills in society, whether it's on a community, national, international, global level. And I think certainly from our perspective, what we've seen is that only when you have all stakeholders coming together, you're able to solve those. So almost decide what side of history you want to be on, and be on the right side of history. I think it's and really decide to make a concerted effort, because I think the future can be positive. It is not so positive right now, but it can be positive.